everyone, it's Stella.
And Taryn here from Meeple University. Today we'll be teaching you how to play Race to the Raft, game designed by Frank West and published by the City of Games.
Let's get to the game.
Race to the Raft is a cooperative puzzle game in which players try to help teams of cats escape from the burning island. Players will aim to play cards to create paths in a cat's matching colour and move those cats towards the raft while trying to keep ahead of the fire tiles which consistently need to be placed. If players can get all cats to the raft before the island burns down, then they'll win the game. The Race to the Raft campaign book contains 81 separate puzzles of increasing difficulty. Scenarios are fully replayable. You're using a randomised board, random cards, and a random draw of fire tiles, so this is not a one and done campaign. In this video, we'll start by teaching you all the rules you need to complete the 4 episodes of the tutorial. Then at the end, we'll teach you some of the advanced rules you'll need to complete the harder scenarios. To set up, you'll need these 5 components: the large boards, small boards, fire cards, location cards with a number, and raft cards with a letter. Each of these is reversible with one number or letter on one side and another on the reverse. Set up the map as shown here. This one requires 2 large boards and 2 small boards. The left hand of each board should be flipped to its fire side, and as long as the fire is in the right orientation, the other boards may be rotated or flipped however you wish. Place fire cards in the depicted locations, and place the specific depicted location cards in the upright orientation in their depicted spaces. On the starting space of each location card, place one of the depicted cat meeples in the upright standing position. Your very first scenario will have the basic raft, which all cats may enter from any direction, but most subsequent scenarios will have one of the more advanced rafts, depicting a specific finishing space for each cat. Your scenario may have an additional objective. Here, for example, you need all cats to escape and for green to arrive first. And if you have these, use the numbered objective tiles and place them on the appropriate end space as a reminder. Separate the 4 decks of path cards by their backs and shuffle them next to the board. Keep 3 water tokens nearby. Place all of the fire tiles into the bag. Distribute the 4 communication tokens, 2 talks and 2 meows, among the players. At 2 players, each will have 1 of each. At 4 players, each will take a single token, and likewise at 3 with 1 of the meows returned to the box. You're now ready to play. A game of Race to the Raft is played in rounds, with the game lasting as many rounds as it requires to either save all of the cats or for the players to lose. A round is broken into 3 phases. First is drawing cards, where each player will draw 3 cards from a combination of the pathway decks. Second is playing cards. In whichever order the players wish, they may play cards from their hands to try to create paths on the map, while also adding and managing fire tiles, or will discard cards to move the cats towards the exits, after which they become exhausted. This phase continues until all players are out of cards. You'll then move to the resting phase, where all of the cats are stood back up from their exhausted positions, and you'll move on to the next round. Race to the Raft is a game of limited communication. There are some specific things you're not allowed to communicate, and some specific times when you're not allowed to talk at all unless you use one of the communication tokens. I'll explain exactly what these restrictions are as we go through the rules in detail. The first phase is drawing cards, and by the end of this phase, each player will have drawn 3 cards, split however they wish across the 4 decks. Since you're trying to make single colour paths, you'll have some idea of what sorts of colours you wish to draw, and the backs of these cards give you some indication of the sorts of squares you'll find on them. Circle, for example, has more red and blue, less yellow and green, and no purple. X has more green and blue, and a little bit of yellow, purple, and slightly more red. Before anyone draws any cards, players may discuss openly which cards they're going to draw. However, as soon as anyone draws at least one card, talking must stop, and players aren't allowed to talk again, nor are they allowed to look at the other sides of any of the cards they've drawn until all players have drawn their 3 cards. You'll now move on to the playing cards phase, and during this phase, players will take turns in whichever order the team decides in order to try to forward their goals and rescue the cats. Throughout this phase, you may always look at both sides of all the cards in your hand, but you can only look at the backs of other players' cards. During this phase, there are 2 states of play, each with different communication restrictions. These are the between turns state of play, when players are communicating and discussing who will take the next turn, and there's the during turn state of play. Once a player has been chosen to take a turn, communication must stop until the player has completed that turn. This forces all players to make their own decisions, rather than having the full team work together to optimize every move. When you're between turns, you can talk freely about what you want to try to do on the board and how strong you think your own cards are in achieving those goals. However, you cannot talk about the specifics of what's on your cards. So, for example, suppose the team was currently focusing on trying to make a yellow path for this cat. Knowing that I've got this card in my hand, I could say, I've got a pretty good card for yellow, I think I should take the turn. However, I could not say I have this specific shape of yellow squares, I think it would be placed best here, and this is why I should go. Essentially, the between turns phase is all about getting a game plan and for all players to work out, based on the vibe, who they think is best placed to act. Once everyone has agreed on which player is taking the next turn, you're now into the during turn state of play, and all communication must stop. The exception is the player who's taking the turn. That player can voice over their thought process as they're making their move. During another player's turn, a player may spend a communication token to break these restrictions. If you spend a talk token, that player may now talk openly with the active player to optimize that move. If you spend a meow token, that player may communicate with the active player, but only using the word meow. Once the turn is complete, you go back to the between turns state of play. There are 2 actions which you can take on your turn: to add a pathway or move a cat. To add a pathway, take any one card from your hand and then place it into a legal position anywhere on the board. It must go on top of the board, and it may go over the top of any other cards already present, but it can't be slid underneath. No part of your newly placed card may cover a fire square, a cat, or the raft. The card also cannot overhang the edge of the board. Then you must draw a random fire tile from the bag and place it into a legal position on the board as well. These follow all the same placement rules with one added restriction, which is that they must be placed orthogonally adjacent to at least one other fire square. The second action is to move a cat. The cost to move a cat, which is in its upright standing position, is to play any one card from your hand to a special pile called the disaster pile. This pile is kept separate to the discard pile, which will also eventually be formed. Now choose any one cat, move it any distance along an orthogonally adjacent path of matching colours, then lie it down. The cat is now exhausted. If you wish to move an exhausted cat, you can, but the cost to take the action is now 2 cards to the disaster pile instead of 1. If it's a legal matching colour, a cat may move over the top of another cat square, but may not finish on it. As the last step, if when you're done the disaster pile contains 4 or more cards, Then move 4 of those cards to the discard pile and resolve the disaster, which is to add another fire tile to the board. Players continue taking combinations of these 2 actions until all players' cards have been played. You cannot leave any cards unplayed. It is mandatory to make a legal play with all of them in each round. The board can fill up with fire very quickly, and at any point when talking is allowed, the team may agree to spend a water token to remove 1 fire tile from the board and return it to the bag. This will give you more chances to complete the scenario successfully. If you've played all your cards and there are still cats unrescued, then move on to the resting phase where you stand them up and then move to the next round. If you get all cats to the raft, and in the correct order if applicable, then you win the scenario. For campaign scoring, you score 5 points minus 1 point for each water you've spent. If you ever can't place the fire tile you've drawn, can no longer legally win the scenario, or there are no fire tiles left in the bag to draw, then you lose the scenario, and for campaign purposes, score 0, or can try to repeat the scenario again. And that's everything you need to play the basic scenarios of Race to the Raft. As you get to the more advanced scenarios, there are some new rules and concepts which make the game more challenging, and I'll introduce you to those briefly now without going through them in detail. Critically, the movement range for a cat is slowed down to only 5 steps. And when you resolve 4 cards on the disaster pile, the active player draws and resolves a disaster card rather than simply placing a fire tile. There are new white-coloured Oshax cats. They can go on any colour of terrain, but require one of these white paths. They can be found on all types of cards, but there are more of them on the triangles. Some starting locations have a thin strip of fire, and another cat of the same colour must be standing on this circle space to free the cat from the fire. Some objectives require cats to stay within 5 spaces of each other as they hop their way along the board. And to make up for these extra challenges, there's a new bonus where once a cat reaches the raft, you can either draw a free card or move another cat for free. Some objectives require simultaneous arrival at the raft, meaning you have to use this extra action to complete both arrivals on the same turn. And that's how to play Race to the Raft. We hope you enjoyed this video.
And thanks so much for watching. Everything you do will help us. Every single view, every time you like our videos, our Instagram, every single comment, and let us know that you did. And make sure you're doing something fun today. See you next time.